Ladies, gentlemen, freaks. Today in Vanessa Jupiter's sitting room, we are talking about the things we choose to put into our bodies. You may have seen this before. It's a coming out video. But beware. We are going to touch on very dark, very difficult subjects. This time, I have chosen not to give a detailed content warning in the beginning of the video. If you'd rather know what are the difficult subjects that I'm going to tackle, you can find timestamps and details in the pinned comment below. The nastier things, because there will be nasty things, will be warned right here with a time to skip to if necessary. Enjoy. So today we're doing something a little different. I'm going to be doing something a little bit more laid back, more relaxed. I'm just going to sit here and tell you all about my own experience with figuring out my sexuality, my gender. I grew up in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is a huge city, which means that for me to understand my own queer identity, what I had to do was more like engage with people outside in the real world. As a teenager, as I started understanding my own sexuality, I actually did have access to actual queer spaces back then, you know? From a very, very young age, it was very clear to me that I was attracted to men. And when I say attracted, I do mean both romantically and sexually, even though it has always been easier for me to understand my romantic attractions, but I always mean both, because they seem to be both kind of everything. And that's where my sexual experimentation as a teenager led me to. As much as my attraction to men has always been extremely obvious, I truly am attracted to pretty much everyone. That segues into like me being a teenager in Sao Paulo, surrounded by people who were generally older than me and had a little bit more experience with relationships and stuff. Very early on, I understood that I was polyamorous. I would talk very, very often about how I didn't really get the appeal of monogamy and why anyone would do it. As I understood myself as not being heterosexual and being attracted to multiple genders, and also understood myself as someone who did not want to have a family unit that would look anything like what we understand, there would be no way for me to exist within heteronormativity. Like, what is even gender? And this is a question that is posed all the time whenever the topic of trans identity comes up. The way that I have to understand gender, and the only thing that I can understand gender as, is related to patriarchy and to family structures and to the nuclear family. As I saw myself growing every day a little bit more distant from a version of a person who could eventually have a nuclear family where I would be daddy. I also realized that there was no way that I could fit into like gender, you know? I truly identify more with motherhood than with fatherhood. Even just making this joke about me being daddy at some point is just so absurd. I am mother. Wait, focus. Once I understood that, very quickly I started asking myself, wait, if I don't fit into heteronormativity, may I fit into cisnormativity? When I put things like this, it's very neat. It sounds like a mathematical equation where it's like person minus heteronormativity equals trans. Therefore, me trans. And it sounds like I just needed a whiteboard to figure out that I was trans. But of course, it's not that simple. Me coming out as trans was anything but cold and calculated. Me coming out as trans was chaos, confusion, cannibal. This is actually a coming out video of sorts. I am going to start HRT, hormone replacement therapy, which means that I am indeed going to start taking estrogen and testosterone blockers. And my body is pretty much going to start going through a sort of second puberty. I have had in my mind the idea that maybe I would want to start taking hormones for a few years, like really in the back of my mind. But I had a few detractors from it. I don't necessarily hate my current body, it's more that I feel a disconnect from it. Which means that for a long time, I considered that the amount of dysphoria that I endured would be relatively okay to live with. Possibly the biggest detractor that I've ever felt regarding starting HRT is the fact that puberty, my first puberty that I had when I was a teenager, that was testosterone based, let's say, was awful. My adolescence was very chaotic. There was just so much going on that the idea that back then I would have formulated like the physical changes that are happening in my body are giving me emotional distress, and it is because these emotional changes are related to the testosterone. I had no way of phrasing things that way. But what testosterone did to my body was absolutely part of the emotional distress that riddled my adolescence. Like, for years, I was like, listen, I like the idea of the changes that HRT would provide to my body, but at what cost? I would have to go through a second puberty? One time was not enough. One time was too much. It's been a few years that it's not as big of a detractor as it was back then. Because the truth is, my first puberty was only that bad because the environment in which I was in wasn't ideal to be going through puberty. I was a teenager trying to deal with everything. In a country like Brazil, which is really quite homophobic, being assaulted by like these feelings that just didn't make any sense with testosterone. Puberty was hell, but I understood that hell was very much setting dependent, and that a puberty that does not center around testosterone, a puberty that is taking place in a supported community as I have one, I can actually do this time without it being the most traumatic thing ever, which hopefully it won't be. but puberty is scary. HRT for me is a way to assuage a lot of the physical discomfort that I'm currently feeling. My body produces testosterone. This is the whole issue. What I want to do with my body is wholly unnatural. I had about a year from me formulating the sentence, I want hormones, to now. And I haven't started yet. There have been a lot of phases of me going through emotional process. And the way that I engage with the idea that my body is about to change a lot has fluctuated, and the type of stuff that I see myself gravitating to has changed a lot. The amount that I want to speak about it has changed a lot. If you've been following my YouTube channel and you've been seeing the type of stuff that I've been talking about, this will come as no surprise. I have been gravitating towards extremely violent media. As someone who does experience dysphoria, as someone who does feel negatively towards my body, Seeing people be mutilated and see people actually change their bodies in this brutal way feels extremely cathartic. One of my favorite types of body horror mutilation scenes has always been castration. I find it really difficult to talk about gender dysphoria without falling into a little bit of gender essentialism. If I say, for example, that I dislike my body hair because it represents masculinity for me, I am essentially saying that body hair is a male feature, which is not really the case. The appeal of castration seems for me really is the idea of removing a symbol of masculinity. I understand that having a penis, liking having a penis, does not mean that anyone is a man. However, as someone who does experience genital dysphoria, seeing castration scenes is always this desire of the removal of manhood. This is where we reach a movie that I really want to talk about in the context of my dysphoria. It's called Cannibal. It is the story of two men who are referred to as the man and the flesh, who meet each other online, and they decide to make a contract that the man is going to remove and eat the flesh's penis. You might have recognized this. This is a famous real world case. This movie called Cannibal is a fictionalized version of that. I heard about this real world crime story type thing for the first time about 6 years ago. And my immediate reaction upon hearing this was, this is my favorite love story ever. And okay, here's the thing. It didn't take me very long to realize that this is not really what love is, and that this is not really a love story, right? Like, but the truth is that this idea of having two men meet each other in order for a penis to be removed, cooked, and eaten, it just immediately became a fantasy of mine. This movie was really like, I needed to watch it. And when I watched it, I almost couldn't believe it. Because I felt like the creators of the movie also saw this as a love story and also saw this as a passion, desire, fantasy, kinky fantasy of these two men who couldn't desire each other more. The thing about Cannibal, like the movie, that was just super striking to me was how much masculinity plays a part in the story. Because this isn't just two people who happen to be men, these are two men who are aggressively gay and who are aggressively into each other. I needed this movie now, right before HRT, because I needed it. Specifically, a gay male fantasy. This movie really felt like my last gay male fantasy. And it was kind of really nice to have that as a final goodbye to my body. Just as any big change that takes place, something that I need to do is to grieve for my body that will not be anymore. And as much as it has given me pain, discomfort, and all types of negative feelings, I really want to thank this form for having been there. And now, after saying thank you, I will also say goodbye. This is part 3 of the video. It's where I talk about being a freak. Let's go back to what it means to be queer for me personally. Queer means strange. Queer means odd. When we as a community, when we as a community identify ourselves with this one word, and this word means strange, what we are doing is that we are pushing against this idea that we need to fit in. Listen, I am not here to gatekeep anyone. And if for you personally the word queer somehow means that you want to be integrated into heteronormative society, go at it. I don't get it? Make your own video. We are going against conformity. There's this thing called respectability politics, which is basically people decide that there's some type of wrong in being public about some aspects of being queer. A great example is BDSM. A lot of people think that making BDSM into like a big part of a queer identity makes us less palatable for the others. Get it? Get why I'm using the word palatable? This is a video about cannibalism. LOL. If someone accepts me only when I am not loud, only when I am not like being extra, only when I'm not talking about how much I want people to eat my penis, this is not true acceptance. If we make ourselves smaller, if we pretend to pass within heteronormative society, this is just never going to happen. And this is why I decided to be a little cheeky in the previous segment and talk about how what I'm doing to my body is not natural. Often the words that are being used against us are not real arguments. Listen, saying that someone's practices, desires, and whatever is unnatural doesn't matter, because maybe it is, maybe it's not. This doesn't give anyone the right to take away someone's rights. This is why I have a bone to pick with that whole faction of queer activism that is like, born this way, this is not a choice, this is just who I am. I think it's empowering, I get it, and I know that it was super necessary for a lot of people, and it's great that you had it. In all seriousness, I know that it was super necessary for a lot of people, and I honestly am glad that there are people saying that it's not a choice and that this is just who you are. But it's not a real argument. If society requires us to claim that our identities are not a choice and that this is the only way that they're going to respect us, that is not real respect, that is not real acceptance, that is not enough. I want you to accept me even if I made a choice to be queer. I don't think I did. Honestly, I do think that I was born this way. However, not exactly this way, but I do think that I was born queer. If you are a queer person and you're in your own journey and this type of talk is bad for you, it's harmful for you, then don't listen to me. Like, I'll keep you posted. If everything fails and next thing I know, like, HRT is causing emotional distress to a degree that it's not supposed to cause, then I'll come back here and I'll openly admit to it. But as of yet, from everything that I understand about HRT, it seems clear that my life will be significantly better. Sometimes I lie awake at night and think about myself as someone who never had access to people using labels such as non-binary, and I never had access to trans communities, and I never had access to trans people. And sometimes my conclusion is I could have stayed in the closet forever, or without even knowing. When I think of that, I don't think that my life would be like the most miserable, the most horrible, the worst life that I could possibly lead. But you know what it would be? Could be a lot worse than this. And furthermore, once I understood I wanted to have hormones, there was no turning back. And then there's all this talk about like transgenders, who are supposed to be people who like only decided to transition and only identify as trans because of the explosion of trans visibility in the media. Am I a transgender? Maybe. Does that mean that I don't deserve rights? No! Does that mean that I should be ostracized from society at large? Sure, who cares? One of the big points of this video, right, is the fact that sexuality and gender are inherently linked for me. Having been socialized as a man and having understood myself as a man for a lot of my life, I realized at some point that socially I could very well be accepted into masculine gay spaces. It's kind of this really weird moment where I see myself having access to a part of the queer community that I don't feel necessarily super detached from it. But at the same time, I see myself having access to that and never feeling really connected with it. At points, I have almost, in a way, wished that I were a gay man and felt so close to being one that this was just kind of awkward and almost unexpected at points, you know? Can you believe that I'm actually recording with natural light? Like, I kind of can't. There's nothing natural about me. I already touched on a few of the issues that I've had with coming to terms with my own gender, but I haven't really touched on the one that I think is probably the biggest one, which is sex. Sex has never really felt good for me. Thus far in my life, anything that is genital centric in either direction has at best felt fine. About a year ago, I was on Twitter, as I usually am, and I found some trans women sharing their lived experiences with their libidos and their genitals before and after going through HRT. And that was kind of the moment that I really decided that I really wanted to do it, actually, because I really, really related to the before experience. I know that HRT affects libido, sexual drive, and genitals very differently for everyone. It affects everything very differently for everyone, right? For a lot of people, the libido seems to disappear for at least a year before it comes back in a way that at least the trans woman that I found felt really satisfied with. I don't know if that's going to happen to me. But part of me also feels like it's such a good bet because there isn't much that could be worse about the way that I experience sexual drive and pleasure right now. My sexual excitement when it comes to my body, my sexual excitement when it comes to my mental space, and my sexual excitement when it comes to my emotions always feel like they are in complete opposition with each other, like they are battling each other, right? Whenever my body feels horny, it's towards things that I actually really have no interest in engaging sexually with. When that happens in person, very often I will try to engage sexually and it just really doesn't work because mentally and emotionally the whole thing just really does not work. When it comes to emotions, very often it's the exact opposite, where I see myself being emotionally attracted to the idea of doing something, and then it feels like my body is wrong in these moments. And mentally, finally, is the one thing that I actually managed to solve. Eventually, I found BDSM, and I realized that BDSM was kind of like this perfect thing for me because it, like, I could do something that is completely without genitals and still feel something akin to sexual pleasure, something that is the closest that I have ever reached of feeling some type of actual sexual pleasure has been through BDSM. But also part of the thing is that BDSM is so much about like getting out of my body. BDSM has this constant fight with my body as the person who is in the recipient end of pain. I hope that I'm managing to impart at least a little bit of the confusion that it is to experience sexual pleasure as me. I understand that being sexually dissatisfied doesn't mean that I'm trans. I get it. I really, really do. Someone being sexually dissatisfied doesn't mean that they should just start taking hormones. Like, that's not how it works, right? But I was already considering hormones before because I am dissatisfied with my body in general, and like there are things about it that I feel disconnected with, but I wasn't like sure. There wasn't like a reason for me to actively want it. And when I read about what HRT would do to my genitals and to my sexual drive, I was like, wow, this is a reason to actually want it. A big transphobic talking point is that trans women are male fetishists who just want to get sexual kicks out of being perceived as a woman. This is a non-argument. This doesn't matter. And like I know what I'm sounding like. It sounds like I'm a fetishist, which I don't care. Enjoying sex shouldn't be taken away from trans people, and trans people talking about how they want to enjoy sex and how HRT has made enjoying sex successful shouldn't negate our trans identities. If you want to call me a sexual fetishist, a depraved sexual deviant, do it. I don't care. It's kind of true. A lot of it is kind of true. There's this one movie that I remembered as I was drafting this video called Spit and Ashes, and I decided to rewatch it, and it is incredible, which is about two women who meet each other in a forest. One of them is dead, and the other one is a witch who casts a spell to revive her, and then they proceed to have kinky gay sex together, and it's wonderful. I don't think ever in my life have I watched a film that made me go, wow, this type of sex. This is the exact type of sex that I want to have in my life. Okay, this movie was really kind of like a mind-blown moment for me for many reasons. So earlier I talked about how my attraction to men is very obvious, and Spit and Ashes was one of these moments when I was really, really immediately and constantly attracted to the top woman. Like, my attraction to women is this thing that I don't often really think about too much. Like, it's there, but it's less in my face, let's say, than my attraction to men. But then, like, Spit and Ashes is also this movie that features fantasies that I have always considered to be quite masculine, actually. Like, it is dirty in a way that up to that moment I would have considered kind of masculine dirty. Particularly, there's a peeing scene, and I have, like, up to Spit and Ashes, I had always considered pee to be kind of like this male fetish of mine. And watching Spit and Ashes was kind of this moment where I like, if I were a woman and I was being peed on by another woman, that would also be extremely hot. Who knew? Marina Beatty is actually a filmmaker that I feel a lot more comfortable recommending than a filmmaker like Marion Dora, who's the person who made Cannibal. The way that I got to Cannibal and to Marion Dora is because last year, May from Nick Spheres made this video about where she talked about a Marion Dora film called The Angel's Melancholia. That was the first time I ever heard of him. The Angel's Melancholia features pig being slaughtered in a way that I don't think is justifiable at all. Like, I don't think that that scene should exist. And I know that the pig would have been slaughtered anyway, that Marion Dora just filmed it happening. But I really disagree with some ethical things about the way that Marion Dora makes films. So I really didn't want to leave this video with the idea that I just uncritically recommend Marion Dora, and instead I would rather recommend something like Maria Beatty, who made Spit and Ashes, and that it has a little bit of a similar vibe to Marion Dora for me. Like, it's woods, it's dirty, it's sexual deviance, and just like Cannibal, like, both of them touch on things that are so particular for me. Both movies are so invested in being extremely gay, like, in very different ways, but both in ways that appeal to me, like, to no end. But at the end of the day, there's also this huge difference between my experience of watching Cannibal and my experience to watching Spit and Ashes, where Cannibal is all about the body that I don't feel comfortable with, the parts of my body that I want to remove, the parts of my body that I want to like have other people take from me, the parts of my body that I want to mutilate. Whereas Spit and Ashes is about what I wish to have with my body, the experiences that I crave to have with my body at some point. So, Spit and Ashes is all about looking at the future. Tonight, I want to talk about love. Love is this thing that I think is part of this channel, that it's everywhere in this channel, but that I rarely directly address. This video is in part about queer liberation. And queer liberation is a step or a goal to create a better society for everyone. The creation process of this video was unsurprisingly very, very complicated. Queer liberation is about hearing each other's truths as they are, and love is about being honest with ourselves and with others. I truly believe that it's not possible to be dishonest within love. Love is an action, and it is a way to move around the world. And if we don't move with love right now, the society we will be creating will be a loveless society. And what would be the point? Me deciding how I would come out about HRT on this channel took several different shapes over the last few months. And this seems like such an absurd way to do it. But I couldn't do it any other way. I needed to be in drag in my bathtub to do it. I needed to talk about two separate horror films about kinky sex. I needed to talk more in depth about who I am, because otherwise it would have been dishonest. And this, right now, this huge, chaotic mess of a video, this is my truth.